I've been playing Yu-Gi-Oh for a very long time, so I've seen tons of cards get banned when they were at their peak power level, and then a few years later get unbanned and no one wants to play them anymore. This is fine, not every single card is going to age well. Of course, you have your all-powerful cards like Pot of Greed and Graceful Charity and Painful Choice. Those cards will probably always be banned because they pretty much only get better with age. It's important to remember that every single card that's ever been banned in Yu-Gi-Oh's history was banned for a reason. That doesn't mean it was a good reason per se, but it does mean that Konami always has a reason for banning cards, at least from their perspective, whether or not the community agrees or disagrees. That being said, Yu-Gi-Oh is an ever-evolving game. We see new mechanics added, we see new types added, we see new sets added. There's always new things, which means that reasons that may have been true 5, 10, 15 years ago won't always be true nowadays in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! In today's video, I want to talk about cards that I feel that are currently banned right now that could go all the way to 3 copies per deck without actually seeing any competitive use. There's actually a lot of cards, in my opinion, that are banned right now that could go to 1 copy per deck and it probably wouldn't break the game, but in today's video we are specifically focusing on the cards that are currently banned that could go all the way to unlimited and probably not make an impact on the meta. Now, I know a lot of old school players will probably watch this video and say, no, you can't unban these cards, they're too powerful, but times change, and as someone who's been playing this game pretty much all of my life, I've seen so many crazy broken cards that got banned only to be unbanned later on and literally no one plays them. Let's start small, start with a card that I think most people would agree would not actually be that good in 2020, and that is Cyber Jar. So I think Cyber Jar could go to a full 3 copies per deck without anyone really playing this card. This card used to be very good back in the day, and it definitely was ban-worthy, and even in formats like Battle Pack, where Cyber Jar is legal in those formats, if you've played like Legacy of the Duelist anytime soon, you might see Cyber Jar in Battle Pack deck lists, and in that format it's very strong. But in modern Yu-Gi-Oh, I just really can't see anyone playing Cyber Jar even if it would be at 3 copies per deck. Cyber Jar is a level 3 rock monster with 900 attack and 900 defense, and it says flip, destroy all monsters on the field, then both players reveal the top 5 cards from their decks, then special summon all revealed level 4 or lower monsters in face up attack position or face down defense position. Also add any remaining cards to their hand. If either player has less than 5 cards in their deck, reveal as many as possible. I think the main reason that we know Cyber Jar is not that good is that Morphing Jar is currently at 1 copy per deck, Morphing Jar number 2 is at 3 copies per deck, and this is sort of a combination of both of those cards. I mean, it draws a bunch of cards, but also it special summons a bunch of monsters, but I don't think that's good enough, and the other 2 jars that are unbanned and actually have seen play in the past are not really seeing any play right now, and I think that Cyber Jar would be the same way. It's not that flip effects are inherently unusable in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! We do still see Shaddolls, we do still see obviously Subterror Guru, but a flip effect monster like Cyber Jar that doesn't really synergize with other cards and is supposed to just be a card that you set and then pass turn. I'm also pretty sure I'll have a couple people that say that Cyber Jar would break Empty Jar, an older archetype that hasn't seen play in years. I don't think that's the case. I actually have an entire video about why Empty Jar would not work in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! The problem is that because you're giving them their entire deck, they will draw every single hand trap that they have available, which makes Empty Jar almost impossible to actually win with because your opponent's always going to draw negations for your cards because you're giving them all the cards that they have in their deck. That was probably the least controversial card on my list. I think most people agree that Cyber Jar would not make a big impact. Maybe if you haven't played modern Yu-Gi-Oh! In like 10 years, I suppose you might think it'd be overpowered still, but I think most people can agree that Cyber Jar wouldn't be that good in 2020. The more controversial Jar opinion that I have is that I also feel Fiber Jar could go back to 3 copies per deck and no one would play it. I mean, what would be the purpose of Fiber Jar? It's even worse than the other Jar cards. I think the only reason this card is banned, and this will actually go for a few cards on the list in today's video, I think Konami only has this card banned because they don't like the mechanic of having the potential to reset the game. Fiber Jar says flip, each player shuffles all cards from their hand, field, and graveyard into the deck, then draws 5 cards. So basically it resets everything except the life points or banished cards, but everything else is back into the deck and both players draw 5 new cards. This really isn't that good in 2020, but back in the day it was super annoying. There was nothing worse than like playing a 30-minute game and then having to run into a Fiber Jar and now everything is reset again and you're basically starting over, which is really bad for tournament play because now matches take even longer and there's more losses to time. It just was not a good tournament experience. Nowadays though, why would you ever even play Fiber Jar? I mean, besides the fact that it'll probably get negated like 9 times out of 10, more importantly, what situation would this card even be played in? I mean, it's supposed to be a board breaking card, right? So you're gonna play it going second, you just set this card and pass. That does not seem very good when the boards you're trying to break are most likely going to have a few forms of negation. And then going first, I mean, it's terrible, right? You just set the card and your opponent just OTKs you, probably through it, because once again, if your entire first turn play is setting a monster and passing, your opponent can just set up a bunch of negations or destructions or whatever. So basically, I feel like Fiber Jar is banned just because Konami does not want a card like this in the game at all. It is pretty bad design. I know Pokemon had a similar card. It was a supporter card that did actually get banned, and Pokemon doesn't even really do bannings. They usually just wait for set rotation, but that card was so annoying to play against that they actually went out and banned it like an emergency ban. I think resetting the game is just a bad mechanic for a card game to have, and I think Konami feels that way as well, so Fiber Jar will remain banned probably forever, but realistically I think the card could go to 3 copies per deck, and I don't really feel anyone would actually play it. Next up we have Time Seal, and I think I've talked about this card a few times, and I don't think it's as controversial as it used to be, but basically Time Seal is way too slow for modern Yu-Gi-Oh! I think this card has been slow for like more than 5 years, and I think that a lot of people that don't feel this card could be unbanned don't fully understand how it works. So with Time Seal, if you went first, you would set the card, and then on your opponent's turn, when you flip it face up, you skip their next draw phase. Now that sounds pretty simple, and it is, but it seems to me, at least looking at my own comment section, that there are a lot of players that didn't play at tournaments back in the day, but did play old school Yu-Gi-Oh! That seem to think that with Time Seal, you can set it on the first turn, and then on your opponent's very first turn, you can flip the Time Seal up to skip their very first draw. That's not how the card works, because the draw phase is already happening while you're trying to use the Time Seal. So this is a card that if drawn on turn 1 will not have an effect on the game until turn 4. You'll be turn 1, your opponent will be turn 2, then you'll have turn 3, and then on your opponent's next turn, which will be turn 4 of the duel, and that's obviously way too slow. Now if you look back to old school Yu-Gi-Oh! Like more than 15 years ago, obviously the game just in general is a lot slower, so a slow card like Time Seal is going to be a lot more powerful. These days though, I just don't see any reason to play Time Seal. It's so ridiculously slow. It doesn't help you build a board on turn 1. It doesn't stop your opponent's plays on their first turn. It's a card that you set to hopefully stun your opponent for 1 draw several turns later, which yeah, is not very good in comparison to modern cards. But even in comparison to older cards, I mean, I'd rather have a card like Solemn Judgment. I'd rather just negate a card. You're not just randomly blindly stopping your opponent from drawing several turns later. You're stopping whatever you want to when you need to. Time Seal is not a very good card, but once again, I think Konami has this card banned, and I think they'll always have it banned because they don't want a card like this existing in the game. I think that Konami just doesn't want a card that skips your opponent's draw phase this easily existing in the game. Very similar to they don't want a card like Fiber Jar existing either. And that gets us to the next card, which is Yatagarasu. And I know this is going to be probably the most controversial choice in today's video. This is one of the cards that made Konami make a ban list in the first place. This was on the original ban list. It was way too good back in the day. Now, I don't even think the main reason this card can come back is because Sangan and Witch of the Black Forest and Chaos Emperor Dragon are all nerfed. That certainly does play a role, but even ignoring that, I mean, why would you ever play this card? The Yata lock would never really work in 2020. There are way more ways ways to stop effects. When you think back to old school Yu-Gi-Oh, there were way less ways to actually stop your opponent's abilities. You had cards, sure, like Mirror Force and Torrential Tribute, but those didn't really stop effects, they just destroyed monsters. And you did have a couple pieces of effect negation, I suppose, but generally speaking, the reason Yatagarasu is so powerful is that it was so hard to interact with. When your opponent summoned the Chaos Emperor Dragon, they instantly blew up the entire field. And then the Sangan or Witch actually searched for the Yatagarasu, so what is your opponent going to do against that? Well, they're not going to really do anything. These days though, I do not think it would be a problem. I actually think it'd be a cool piece of legacy support for Shino Birds and other spirit cards. That deck never really made it to the forefront of competition despite having some pretty powerful cards, but I think having back Yatagarasu, if they even would play it, I think they'd probably play like one copy, but that would be a cool way to give that deck a little bit of legacy support, because spirit monsters are kind of in a rough spot right now, as they sort of always have been. But obviously there are standouts like Yatagarasu and old school Yu-Gi-Oh, but nowadays I think spirit monsters could use that small boost. I think it would be pretty cool. Okay, that was a tough one. I'm sure I'll get a lot of insightful comments from the Yatagarasu going to 3 statement that I just made. Let's end it on a different note. I'll say that Ultimate Offering could probably go to 3 copies per deck. I really do not think that people would play this card. Yes, there are theoretically infinite loops that can be made with Ultimate Offering, crazy boards that can be made with Ultimate Offering, but I think realistically those things would not happen. Yes, there are cards like Temple of the Kings that would allow you to play Ultimate Offering on turn 1, but I don't think that actually would be played in competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! If you just draw the Temple or just draw the Ultimate Offering, they're pretty much completely useless, so I don't think any real combo deck would want to play that sort of interaction. Ultimate Offering obviously does have the potential to be broken, but nowadays combo decks don't want to set an Ultimate Offering, wait a turn, and then combo off. They want to combo on turn 1. I know it's pretty crazy, but yes, combo decks actually do want to set up their big boards on the very first turn, not set a trap card and wait until their next turn, because by that point their opponent might have made their own board to just negate the Ultimate Offering anyways. So I don't think that Ultimate Offering would be a problem right now. I think this card, compared to the other cards in today's video, does have the most potential to be broken in modern Yu-Gi-Oh, but I just don't see those types of combos actually being more consistent, actually being more powerful than what people are already doing without playing this sort of card. Anyway though, that's pretty much all I have to say for today's video. I'm sure the comment section is going to be beautiful on this video. I think I've mentioned a couple of these cards in past videos, but I've never made an entire dedicated video to talking about just this topic, so I think it'll be interesting to see what the comment section on this video looks like, because yeah, if you're an old school player that saw these cards in their prime, you probably don't want to see them added back into the game. But I think when you really sort of think about it and actually try to build decks with these cards and play them against the current meta, you'll quickly find that yeah, they're not as good in 2020. I'll see you guys later though. Thank you so much for watching today's video. Goodbye.